Hello, everybody. Welcome to the third Life Engineering live broadcast. As a reminder, we're going to do this live broadcast on all of our social channels every Tuesday at 2 o'clock. This is a great way if you're really interested in learning more about what we do and learning more about life and achievement and some of the principles that we teach and the science that we've conducted. And this is a great way to just kind of log in and get a taste of some of these things. Each week we'll be going through and introducing to you a little bit more of each of our core frameworks. These are fundamental frameworks that are extremely powerful and compelling and can be very, very meaningful in giving you added insight and perspective on your life and the lives of those people who are around you. What we're going to do is at the beginning of each of these lives, I'll kind of go back through a little bit of the ground we've already covered. Partially that'll give us time for people to join and get access. And for those who are coming on new, it'll give them an opportunity to kind of have this sort of catch a taste of the things that we've already covered leading up to now. As a reminder, though, you can go back in our channel to see previous lives, or you can visit our website at lifeengineering.com and go to our live streaming page, and you'll be able to access all of our lives from the website, all of our past lives, so you can go get caught up. Today, we're going to be talking about, I think, perhaps my very favorite model of all. This is the journey to purpose. And this model really is designed to help you catch perspective of the journey that you're on. There's times in life where we get so mired in the minutia. We get so mired in the day-to-day. We get so bogged down with tasks and activities and commitments and all of these things. And there are those moments in life where you have times of clarity, times where you sort of rise up above that minutia. You rise up above and you kind of catch a glimpse of the landscape of your life. Those are really, really powerful moments. And what I love so much about this particular model is really, it creates that sense of perspective. It creates that sense of clarity. It creates that sense of the grander landscape of your life. Let me share my screen now, and I want to walk through just a little bit of what we've covered already as a reminder. So in our first live, we talked about what we call the performance iceberg, which is this idea that we tend in our lives to fixate on time and talent, because time and talent, or what we do with our time and our talent, which is really manifest as behaviors, is so easily observable that it tends to be all we look at. And the reality is, and we think that those are the main things that lead to performance. And so when we try to increase our performance in our lives, whatever category of our lives we're looking at, we tend to focus exclusively and myopically on time and talent. But the reality is there's something much more important happening, and that's energy. Energy is the mass at the bottom of the iceberg. And when your energy for a task or in an orbit, as we talked about last week, is small, then it shrinks the impact of your time and your talent, and what's left is a performance gap. And when we try to solve for the performance gap, we try to solve for time or we try to solve for talent, but very often it's not a time problem or a talent problem, it's an energy problem. When we add energy, when we add that mass back to the bottom of the iceberg, it drives up the impact of time and talent, and we get back to peak performance. And it turns out the research on this is abundantly clear that when it comes to performance between time, talent, and energy actually matters most. And we get this inherently, we understand this idea that, those things in your life that you are most successful at are undeniably those things for which you have the most passion and enthusiasm and emotion and sentiment and satisfaction and energy. Like they are the things that you are most engaged in. Those things that you are least engaged in, that you have the least amount of energy for, even if you have lots of time for it or lots of talent for it, you're just not going to be successful and high performing at, because you just don't have the energy for it. So then the real question is, okay, well, how do we understand energy? How do we optimize for energy? How do we measure it? How do we manage it? And what we have done at Life Engineering is created this rich scientific tapestry to understand the landscape of engagement. And engagement, this term engagement, is really designed to describe the way that we sort of emotionally invest and divest in the things of our lives that matter most. And we traverse these stages of disengagement. And this is a normal journey. We covered this model, the orbit of engagement, last week. And the stages that we usually go through are when we first, commit to something, when we first start a relationship, when we first start a job, when we first, begin an objective, we're in a state of peak engagement. But at some point, there's this departure trigger. Something happens, and we begin to go through this process of emotional distancing. And often that's this process of resolving cognitive dissonance, because we no longer feel as close to or as engaged in this thing that we at one time cared so much about. And so we start to create this internal narrative that forgives that distance. And as we build that narrative, we begin to entrench ourselves in that narrative. And all of a sudden, emotional distancing gives way to solidifying resolve. And if we don't do anything about it, that becomes the crystallization of discontent. And that becomes escape velocity. Escape velocity is where the gravitational pull of the orbit that you were in is no longer great enough to hold you. And so you quit and leave. Now, the problem is often we don't quit and leave. We quit and stay. And we stay in a state of solidifying resolve or crystallization of discontent. We quit and stay in a relationship. We're no longer working on making it better. We quit and stay in our jobs. We no longer are truly investing ourselves and trying to increase our performance and our productivity. We quit and stay in an objective, in all kinds of things. Now, all along this spectrum of stages, and traversing these stages is very, very natural. Like, we all do it. The point is, we need to be able to know and identify which stage we're in so that we can make a conscientious decision about what to do about it. Because it's not always true that the orbit that we are in is one that we should re-engage with. Sometimes it happens that the orbit that we are in is toxic. It's an orbit that we want to exit. It's a bad belief system or pattern of behaviors, or it's a bad relationship or a bad job, or it could simply be an orbit whose value has expired. And now it's time to move on, in which case we should recognize that we are no longer making progress, that we've begun this disengagement, and we should fuel that disengagement so that we can move on to something else. Today, we're going to talk about that process of moving on to something else. And this is really, really important, because the idea of an orbit is not that we should enduringly persist in that orbit. Some orbits we do persist in, but other orbits are temporary. They're meant to act as a milestone on a larger journey to purpose, which is what we talk about today. Also, in the orbit of engagement, we introduced this idea of the 16 elements of engagement. Now, as we studied the science of gamification and the industry of gaming and game design and game mechanics and game theory, and as we looked at motivational psychology and behavioral psychology and industrial organizational psychology, which is the psychology of people at work, and we looked at and studied the lives of high achievers, what we found is that there were 16 fundamental elements that create engagement, that create energy. And when any of these elements are missing, our engagement decreases. The presence of these elements is what creates the mass around our orbit. And it gives it, the more mass, the more gravitational pull. That's what creates that sense of why. Why do I keep showing up? Why should I keep investing? Why am I staying? And when that why starts to shrink, then all of a sudden, the orbit loses its gravitational pull and we start to disengage. In the Academy of Life Engineering, our Achievement Academy, which is now live, and you can get access to it right now on our website, lifeengineering.com. We have beautiful professional courseware around each of these models and around each of these elements so that you can learn and identify, either as an individual, if you're solving for yourself, or as a leader, if you're solving for your children, or maybe for people on your team, or maybe in your organization. You can learn to understand and identify what each of these elements are, how they impact us, how you activate them, how you optimize for them, and very importantly, how you measure them and whether they are active or inactive in whatever orbit you're optimizing for. But regardless, the presence of those elements is what gives an orbit a gravitational pull. Now, here's where we start talking about this larger journey, kind of having laid that foundation of the science of disengagement and engagement and the importance of learning how to understand and optimize for our energy, the energy we have for the things that we do. Now, we really live messy lives, and sometimes it feels like this is how we live, right? It just kind of sometimes feels like we're just wandering back and forth, and who knows if we're making progress. We're moving like we're going forward in time, but are we going forward towards something meaningful, towards something that we care about? Are we actually progressing towards some form of purpose? This is the real question. Now, as you try to live deliberately, what happens is it's less like this and it's kind of more like this, right? Over time, we start to kind of hone in. Our wavelength starts to shrink because we start to learn, right? And this is really experience-driven course refinement. There are these moments where we're like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be in a relationship like that again. Or, oh my gosh, I am never going to work in a job. I'm never going to have a job like that again. Or I'm never going to work for someone like that again. Or I'm never going to do that again. And as we kind of go through life and move, from orbit to orbit, we start to really identify the things that we love and the things that we don't love. And as we kind of pay attention to that and evolve our course accordingly, we start to kind of zone in on our ultimate why. It's our ultimate purpose. It's the why we are here. It's our unique magic. It's the thing that is just ultimately us. It's ultimately you. And you know what? This is what we call our journey to purpose, is how we progress from where we are today to where we want to be tomorrow. Mark Twain is rumored to have said, the two most important days of our lives are the day we are born and the day we find out why. And, at Life Engineering, we care a lot about helping connect people to that why, that not just the why around an orbit, but the broader why of your life, of why you're here and what you're meant to do. And there's a light that comes from that direction. There's a light that comes from that why. And when you're over here on the beginning of your journey, sometimes that light feels very faint and very dim. And the closer you get, the farther you move and the closer you get to it, the more warmth and light you start to feel, and the easier it is to hone in on that direction. It's like, I often talk about it, it's like playing the game of hot and cold. If you remember as a kid, you'd play that game and somebody would hide something somewhere in the house, and you'd, somebody else would go out and they'd come in and they'd start to walk around. And as they walked around, if they were getting closer, you'd be like, you're getting warmer, getting warmer, getting warmer, or getting colder. Life is like that. There's moments where we just feel like we're getting warmer. And there's moments where it just feels like we're getting colder. Learning to recognize that activation or deactivation of the energy, the inherent energy inside of us, tells us when we're getting warmer and when we're getting colder. One of the most powerful instruments that we have in our life engineering membership is something we call the engagement assessment. And it's this scientifically built diagnostic. It was built by a team of scientists that designed it such that over time and across objectives and contexts of your life, you can take this. And the outcome of which is it actually helps you diagnose and measure with extreme specificity when you're getting hotter and when you're getting colder. And being able to recognize when you're getting warmer is super powerful, because all of a sudden, when you feel like I'm getting warmer, that's an indication to you that you are directionally, that you are going the right direction. And when you start to notice that you're getting colder, that could very well be an indication that you're now going the wrong direction, or that it's just time to move to the next step in your journey. And so paying attention to the light of this purpose, even if you don't have access to the diagnostic as a member, even if you just learn to pay attention to that light that you either feel or don't feel as you move forward in life, is an incredibly powerful way to learn to dial in on your ultimate why. And there's multiple smaller whys that we sort of move through as we progress on our journey. These are milestones. You know, if you're looking at this as like your career, you have multiple jobs as you move forward throughout your career. And, you know, you'll orbit those, or it could be a relationship. And often there's multiple, you know, let's say it's with a spouse or a partner. Often there's multiple relationships that you'll go through as you go search for your ultimate partner. Whatever category of your life that that you're optimizing for, you have these major milestones. And again, the orbits manifest themselves around each milestone. And again, we first sort of have this peak engagement with this first milestone on this category, this categorical journey. And we experience that peak engagement because we're attracted to the gravitational pull of that why. And, ultimately and inevitably, because we're human beings, we go through emotional distancing. And if nothing is done, that emotional distancing gives way to solidifying resolve and becomes the crystallization of discontent. And now, as you recognize in this broader picture, you're so far away from the original orbit that you entered that now what happens is you can see farther. When we're at a stage of peak engagement, one of the characteristics that identifies a state of being in flow or peak engagement is we start to experience what is called contextual myopia. We fail to see beyond the immediacy of the orbit that we are in. But as we start to detach, and sometimes that's why this detachment, these stages of disengagement are healthy, because they're moments where we kind of check ourselves against our broader journey to purpose. And we ask ourselves, is this orbit that I'm in right now, is this still the right orbit for me? And if so, I'm going to re-engage. And if not, I'm going to move on. And so that moment of moving on is when we sort of we're far enough away emotionally from the orbit that we just were once so grounded in, that now we see what's next. And we start to be pulled by the gravitational pull of another orbit. Now, remember, sometimes this is not an orbit that should be next. Sometimes this is it's a distraction. It's an orbit that pulls us away from our journey. Hopefully, though, you often will find yourself attracted to the next milestone in your broader journey to purpose as you follow the path of that warmth and the light that comes from your ultimate why and where you're ultimately supposed to end up. And in that moment, you have a very, very important decision to make. And that decision is called escape velocity. That decision is, am I going to choose to re-enter the orbit that I was in because there's still value there? or there's something more I have to accomplish, or it's just not the right time? Or are you going to choose to exit and go into the next orbit because the value of the orbit you were in has expired and it's time to move on? The problem is very often, people get to this moment of escape velocity, this moment where they have recognized, I'm no longer benefiting from the orbit that I am in, and I can see what's next. And sometimes we can't even see what's next. We just feel the pull, right? You can see that little overlap of the gravitational pull that's right there. You can feel that pull and you can sense that there's something next. But this moment is a moment of courage. It takes confidence. It takes courage, because at this moment, and we've all gone through this, right? As you've left one job to start another, as you've left one relationship to start another, as you've left one objective to pursue another, this is a moment where you're kind of stepping away from the known and into the unknown. You're taking a step out into the darkness, and you don't know what this orbit ahead looks like. You don't know what it's going to be like. There's a little bit of risk there, and sometimes there's a lot of risk there. And often when we face the unknown, often when we face the darkness of what's next, we decide to turn back. And sometimes that's valuable. Sometimes there's value in re-entering an orbit that we were in and getting some more velocity before we propel ourselves forward. But this is an important decision that you have to make. And whenever we face forward and we face that darkness, we have to recognize that there is value in moving forward on your journey. And it's fascinating, because in life, what happens is we kind of get to the end and we look back and we can see how everything lined up. But in the moment, we don't know how it's going to line up. All you can sense is whether or not this next thing is pulling you in the right direction or not. And if it is, if you feel like it's propelling you towards your purpose, make the step, take the jump, make the leap, enter that new orbit, and move on, move forward. And when you do, what you'll find is you'll experience what we call orbital drift. You'll notice that each of these orbits, in our prior model, for simplicity's sake, we sort of draw the orbits out linearly. But what actually happens is you'll notice that, when you first enter that orbit, you're sort of orbitally facing your old orbit and your new orbit. Well, every time you gain a little bit of distance, what happens is your broader purpose, the light of your broader purpose, starts to pull you outward, and you start to move away and graduate emotionally and mentally from that old orbit you were in. And finally, and inevitably, you'll catch sight of what's next, and you'll be attracted to the gravitational pull of that, and you'll just go through that same orbital cycle over and over and over until ultimately and inevitably you find yourself having identified exactly what you're supposed to do. And in that moment, when you're experiencing the brightness and the light, and you're basking in the glory of having achieved, the end state of this journey, even though there's probably going to be more in the future, that is a moment of such happiness and delight, when you feel like you can look backwards and you can see how everything has lined up, and you can just sort of relish in the journey that you've taken. But it's a journey that requires multiple jumps, multiple times where you have to decide to leave something behind and move on to something new. In our academy, there's a course called New Boots that I'll probably do a live about it sometime soon. It's this compelling story about being able to recognize the things we have to leave behind so that we can successfully move forward. And that's what this is really all about. Now, as we look at this, sort of journey to purpose, and we look at all of these gravitational pulls, there's one thing to remember. Not every gravitational pull that we feel is something that leads us in the right direction. Throughout our entire journey, there's going to be things that we encounter that are going to pull us in all kinds of different directions. And sometimes it's really hard to stay focused on that journey forward. One of the things that we do at Life Engineering is we help provide you the instruments and the training to be able to assess new opportunities, so that you know whether or not this new orbit is something that you should invest yourself in and enter into, or if it's a distraction from your core journey to purpose. Without that knowledge, it can be really hard to know. But as long as you follow generally that sense of like, I feel like I'm getting warmer. This next decision just feels like I'm getting warmer. It's not perfect. It's not the end state. It's not the final step in my journey, but it feels directionally sound. That's what matters most. As long as you continue to take the next step. There's a book that I love by Brandon Sanderson, and he has a quote in this book that's one of my all-time favorite quotes. And this quote is, the most important step in any journey is the next step. As long as we are just relentlessly committed to taking the next step, whatever that next step is, whether it's continuing to engage in an existing orbit or choosing to move on into a new orbit, as long as we relentlessly take that next step and we make sure we are following a path that consistently feels like we're getting warmer, we'll ultimately find ourselves looking backwards and seeing how all of those dots connect, and we'll be happy and delighted in where we are and who we are. Now, what we've done here is we've really captured one journey of one category. We talk often about career because this is a category that people can connect with easily, right? It's an emotionally safe category to talk about. Whether we're successful in the career, whether we love our career or not, like this is just a category of life that we as human beings tend to talk a lot about. And that in and of itself, career is a journey, and you're on a journey in your career, but it's not the only journey in your life. There are other journeys that you're on. Career is what we call a critical context. There are multiple categories of our lives that we live in, and some categories are critical. They're critical to who we are. Career is often one of those that is critical to who we are, our core us, and why we're here. But there are other journeys. There's a journey of family. There's a journey that we're on of mind and intellect and learning. There's a journey of body and how we take care of this the body that we have, which is incredibly important. And there's a journey that we have of our spirit. And there's a journey that we have, that's our social journey. And you might have other journeys. You might have more journeys. You might have fewer journeys. You might phrase these journeys differently. But the reality is we have to live our lives in a way that allows us to optimize for multiple journeys. And there's this light that sort of shines from this ultimate thing that we're trying to accomplish in our life. And what we're trying to do is bring all of these journeys together to become the ultimate you. And that's the ultimate journey that you're on, is to identify the potential that resides within you and to take the journey forward across every context of your life so that you figure out and can realize that full potential. And that's really why you're here. You're here to become the ultimate you. And that's what we need from you. Every single one of us has this powerful potential lying just below the surface, and learning to identify that potential, learning how to tap into it and unleash it and activate it and live it. That's what life engineering is all about. Now, this is the journey to purpose. This is the journey to purpose, the broader journey to purpose for an individual. Now, if you're a leader in an organization, this actually looks a little bit differently in that what you are trying to do is identify for your team, what is our team's why? What is our team's purpose? And then you're trying to guide each of these individuals who are on your team on their own journey to be ultimate contributors in that team. Why? As an organization, if you're an executive in an organization, you look at this and you know that organizationally we have a why, we have mission, we have vision. Like there's a difference we're trying to make in the market. And you have multiple departments that you are trying to orchestrate and coordinate on their own independent journeys with their own independent leaders as they dial in and hone in on that ultimate why. that's how this model works. Now, if you'd like more details on this model, we would, let me switch here. If you'd like more details on this model, we'd love to be able to give you more. All of this is available in our online achievement academy at lifeengineering.com. If you have questions, I'd love to stay on for a little bit and answer any questions. Otherwise, thanks for joining us for another day today, another live. I hope you come back next week. Next week, we're going to go into even a deeper dive. We're going to take this sort of journey to purpose, and we're going to go even deeper in and identify the emotional journey, the emotional cycle of every journey that we take. This is a highly enlightening model that allows us to recognize sort of what are we feeling today and why are we feeling that and what are we going to feel next, because it turns out that that's actually very predictable. So that's what we're covering next week. So we got one question. How do you know when you have arrived at your ultimate why? That's a really good question. I would say that you don't know that you ever have arrived. The farther you get in your journey, the farther you recognize you have to go. And this is this unending process of continuous improvement. And all you're doing throughout your entire life is simply following the warmth, following the light. And at the end of your life, you'll look back and you'll realize, I found this is who I am. This is what I am capable of. I don't know that you ever actually feel like, okay, I've landed and this is it. Like I'm done. This is all I'm going to do. This is all I'm going to be. I think that no matter how old you are constantly feeling like there's more. There's more. As long as there's more time, there's more to do. There's more to develop. There's more to learn. There's more to become. And that feeling of like constant and persistent and relentless, like growth and development is phenomenal, and it's enlightening, and it breathes life into you. And it's as soon as you lose that, that's when all of a sudden, like, you lose your passion, energy, and enthusiasm for just living. And who wants to live like that? All right. If you have questions, please feel free to ask questions in the social channel after the live broadcast is ended. Love to engage with you. Otherwise, we'd love to have you on the website. We'd love to have you back next Tuesday for our next live. We'd love to have you come join the Academy, join our early access program. And otherwise, I'll see you all next week.